Paper Mario is one of the most divisive Nintendo series on the friggin' planet. It's had its ups and downs, from its spectacular beginnings with unique gameplay mechanics to later titles where the game feels overly gimmicky and caused outrage among the community. So I wanted to take a look at every game in the series and analyze the rise and the fall of Paper Mario. In this video, I'll be breaking down each game individually and discussing the development, the good, the bad, and the reception. From there, we can see how this franchise started to lose its place. Let's start from the beginning, the rise. The Paper Mario series was never supposed to become its own franchise at the beginning. In fact, it was supposed to be a sequel to the popular Super Mario RPG, which was a hit back when it released on the SNES in 1997, even earning itself a 2023 ground-up remake. Thank goodness they remade it too. It allowed me to fall in love with these quirky RPG mechanics that initially made millions of fans understand that there's more to life than Mario jumping around and driving in carts. I never had a chance to play Mario RPG back when it released in 1997, because this is what I looked like. I didn't exist. Needless to say, the game was a hit, and Nintendo needed more. With the success of Super Mario RPG, Nintendo wanted to make a sequel for their new hardware, the Nintendo 64, showing off its new power while also innovating on its predecessor. The game began development with the developer Square, now known as Square Enix, but due to their scheduling conflicts and their own projects like Final Fantasy and potential licensing issues with original Square-made characters like Geno, Nintendo shifted development to Intelligent Systems, with the project name being Super Mario RPG 2, and was originally being made for the Nintendo 64 disk drive in mind, which was a commercial failure and didn't even come to North America. The name of the game was later changed to Mario Story, but here in North America it was titled Paper Mario. The developers wanted to change the art style completely for this new entry. Instead of going back to their older assets or using 3D poly models, the art director went with the visual likeness of arts and crafts after taking inspiration of this photo, with 2D sprites in a 3D environment. And thus, all sprites would now be flat 2D cutouts that we could see flip just like paper. And this new art style stood out especially with the impressive 3D maps these characters would play on. The game would eventually be released in Japan in August 2000 and made its way to North America in February 2001. While creating the game, more than half the development time of 4 years went towards perfecting the battle system. They wanted to make sure new fans weren't completely overwhelmed, but also that the more experienced players would still find it engaging. Playing this game, I was pleasantly surprised with how well this holds up. It's a fantastic RPG in its own right, especially considering the predecessor Super Mario RPG was also amazing. This feels like a true sequel of that with a little more in-depth gameplay mechanics. It's wild to see how in their first shot at this new style of game, they were able to add so much charm with each side character. Each one has their own story, like the first sidekick Goombario, being a massive Mario fan and wanting to adventure. And this was one of the first times these enemies were just chilling out, being cool with Mario. Speaking of Mario, they made him spew personality. Even though he was completely silent, the animations made him seem more endearing. One thing they nailed the first try was the battling system. This was incredibly unique. Instead of just timing jumps normally, they made you flick your stick, hold a certain button, and more. Each of these action buttons were now different, as opposed to these Super Mario RPG basic button hits. You can also use a variety of items and special moves. There's also a flower system that lets you use a certain amount of flower points for more powerful attacks. They also made this battling system more visually appealing, instead of the previous Mario RPG where the characters just kind of stand there and attack each other one after the other. The game amps up the personality, with more visual effects, facial expressions, and of course, more jumping. Let's not forget about the badges that were brought over to this game to give Mario even more buffs during gameplay. The 3D map exploration was also really neat too, and I like how they made the map interesting by including your sidekicks to do specific things on the map, like how the Bob-omb sidekick would blow up cracks in the wall for new entryways, or the Koopa would allow you to reach new switches and items that you couldn't use before. It all just blends really well together. All that mixed with an intriguing leveling up system, with a well-written story, and you have a banging game. And heck, I played it on the Switch, and that was a lot of fun. I usually don't play many games on NSO, but buying it for a year to play this game and potentially more is much more worth it to me than buying it for an absurd price on the original console. This was a treat until I accidentally loaded from a save over half an hour ago. I take back everything I said. Critics were also happy, giving this game a 93 on Metacritic, with GameSpot giving it a 95, saying with stunning graphics, excellent sound, and extremely solid gameplay, Paper Mario is a quality time on all fronts. Or no matter what your tastes are, after just an hour in Mario's New World, we can guarantee that you'll not want to move from your chair ever. With the game selling very well for a late Nintendo 64 game at 1.37 million units, Nintendo was bound to create a sequel to follow this up. And thus, Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door was born, and is well known as the best Paper Mario game in the series by far, by most fans. It's essentially a more fleshed out version of the first Paper Mario game, adding more of the paper aesthetic, creating more unique side characters that stick out, and exploring another massive map with so much personality with a really engaging story. Nintendo first announced this game at the Game Developers Conference in 2003, tentatively titled Paper Mario 2, or in Japan, Mario Story 2, with no gameplay footage, but it was eventually shown with a demo at E3 2004, officially unveiling the title Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door. And the game was finally released in Japan in July and came to North America in October. Once again, the game would be created by Intelligent Systems at the helm. And surprisingly, this wasn't the only RPG Nintendo had their mitts on. Alongside Paper Mario, there was a new RPG specifically for the handheld systems, closely mimicking the battle system, and would be known as the Mario and Luigi series. This would eventually become the staple of Mario RPGs, but we'll touch on that later. This game did pretty much everything right. It made what was good about the first Paper Mario game even better, adding new memorable characters and environments. The story was in-depth and intriguing. The combat and leveling up system was fine-tuned and improved, adding an audience development and developing the in-depth combat system. Bosses were extremely fun, the music was great, everything just worked so well. But not everything was perfect. There was a bit of a complaint when it came to the backtracking, but overall, this was a formula fans loved, and of course, they wanted more. And yes, as we know, The Thousand Year Door did good enough to get a remake. It's clear this game was bound to be an instant classic. The GameCube version was generally favorable, scoring 87 on Metacritic, with comments from the Game Boys saying incredible replay value with a lengthy main storyline and dozens of side quests and things to collect in your spare time. It seems like there's always something to get in between quests, which makes the game long-lasting and very hard to put down. Or GameSpot saying it's practically overflowing with wonderful, funny characters, memorable subplots, inventive gameplay, and beautiful visuals. And it's lengthy and quite challenging to boot. And don't worry, we'll come back to the Switch version a little bit later. But like all things, what comes up must come down. And thus, the fall began. Super Paper Mario for the Wii. Intelligent Systems would once again be developing the new title, Super Paper Mario. The director of the game wanted to change the traditional concept of this one to allow players to go between 2D and 3D worlds. He also stated that the game would implement the classic RPG battling system most fans were used to, but the development team eventually decided against this and made this an action-adventure game and not an RPG, which fans had come to expect. This was meant to surprise the community, and did it ever. The game was publicly announced at E3 2006 and was originally planned to be released for the GameCube in the fourth quarter of that year, and even gave it a release date of October 6th. This was meant to be one of the last first-party games on the system. It was eventually delayed and pushed onto the next generation console, the Wii, which made it the first Mario game on that system. And interestingly, I found some gameplay demos at the World Hobby Fair in Tokyo in 2006 before the game was converted to Wii, and I think that's pretty cool. I think this is when Nintendo started to get a little more experimental, converting a series from an RPG with action-adventure mechanics to a full-on action-adventure game with a little amount of RPG mechanics. It's the starting point at where the series started to fall off, having lost some of what made it so special. But actually, they took this as an opportunity to expand this world in a different way. It's a little more gimmicky this time around, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. I felt like the game had really solid platforming, and I genuinely liked the puzzles between the 2D and 3D world. It's such a creative way to make a platformer game like this, with the majority of the game being a 2D platformer. When they were designing the 2D and 3D levels, they found it difficult to create a harmonic relationship between the worlds of 2D and 3D, and mentioned that the process consisted of trial and error, and required them making 2 levels instead of 1, mainly because they wanted to add 3D secrets that couldn't be discovered in 2D. And this was the beginning of the 2D Mario craze. And this game is exactly that, a 2D Mario game that is above and beyond creativity. Like seriously, even though the new Super Mario Bros. Series would eventually become the main 2D Mario games, this was already kind of like that, but wasn't afraid to get weird with it. Thankfully, this game didn't get rid of all the side characters, but they did make them a little less interesting overall. With these little guys, they're pretty much just shapes with powers. Not horrible gameplay-wise, and added an interesting aspect to each level. Nowhere near as memorable, but still glad to see them here. As mentioned, this game was praised for being a 2D 3D platformer. It was extremely creative and included so much exploration with the 2 different perspectives. And while the battling was missing, it was fun to see a return of the classic 2D platformer formula, because here you're just jumping on enemies, or your sidekick fights instead of you going into battle and you going back and forth like an RPG. And I think for the masses, this just made more sense. But it heavily took away some gameplay depth fans adored before. But what didn't leave was a leveling up system, which is pretty hard to come by in a platformer like this, but they surprisingly added that here, and it worked very well. Giving you an upgrade by simply playing the game is always welcome, just casually awarding you with extra HP and attack power. Also, let's not forget about the implementation of other playable characters and cool power-ups. All of these things were welcome additions and made the game feel different to its predecessors, which is a good thing to a certain degree, but there were some things that fans weren't as enthusiastic about. By the way, when I say fans, I mean me. While this technically didn't start the fall of the series, it's important to remember what made the previous games so great. Unique RPG elements, interesting characters and story, and of course the fantastic battling system, which we started to see erode away here. What was fairly annoying about this game was the Wii Remote. For a majority of the game, you hold the controller on its side, using the D-pad to control Mario and using A to swap between worlds and 1 and 2 as action buttons. First thing, I forgot how bad it is to do platforming on this Wii D-pad. But aside from that, everything else was fine. Oh, but it's on Wii, so we had to use the pointer. Okay, I get it. At the time of release, the Wii was new and we needed to use some Wii gimmicks. This one was forced. They made you point the Wii remote at the screen to unlock secret passages and items, which is fine for the most part, but having to move back and forth between these control schemes is annoying. And because I don't have the pointer always on screen, I found myself constantly forgetting about this feature, which made me get stuck more than I want to admit. But also at the same time, why was this even a feature? We know this was never intended to be in here in the first place because the game was originally designed for the GameCube. So yeah, I don't like that. I also wanted to touch on the story. This is something the last two games did very well, and I have to say, the story itself isn't bad, but I felt it dragged on. Not to mention how things just sort of happen. Like Mario and Luigi infiltrating Bowser's castle because he forgot to lock his gate. Things are just so forced. And don't get me started with the amount of useless text that happens with the rambling of all the characters. I don't know if I'm being too harsh here, but I felt like the story was padded out way too much here. Like, just get to the point. Another problem I had, the aforementioned backtracking and mundane tasks. All those things aside, I thought the platforming was really tight and I liked the classic jumping on enemies. I also thought the power-ups were cool and the overall pace of the game was solid, but that's if I wasn't getting stuck in a certain place for a while because I forgot about one of the many gimmicks this game introduced. As for critics, this game scored decently well with 85 on Metacritic, with Game Radar Plus saying anyone with half a heart will absolutely fall in love with the characters, the graphics, the dialogue, and the old school shoutouts to previous games, the little visual effects lingering in the skies of every world. The love just keeps plopping out of the speakers at an incredible rate. For every annoying, excessively long fetch quest or mundane puzzle, there's a huge cutesy payoff that makes all the trouble worthwhile. It was clear that although Nintendo wanted to mix things up a bit, there was still love for this title that carried over. This is also the best-selling Paper Mario game yet, with over 4 million copies sold, and some would even consider it to be the peak of the series. But this was the last time fans of the series resonated well with the new gimmicks, as you'll see as we continue. Alright, this game gets so much hate, but does it deserve it? Well, Paper Mario Sticker Star was announced at E3 2010, without the Sticker Star. Very little was known about this game until the following year, where it was eventually given a trailer showing off the new sticker mechanic and platforming features. At this point, the game was just called Paper Mario 3DS. It wasn't until the next year that we finally got a full name and an approximate release date, being holiday of that year. While it was in development, the game designer and producer Shigeru Miyamoto insisted that the gameplay should stand out compared to the previous entries, because at first, he thought the game was going in a very similar direction as the last installments, which for some reason he didn't like. He mentioned that gameplay and combat needed to be the driving factor, and the story and plot wasn't as important. This was also the first time they removed sidekicks entirely, as they didn't lend themselves that well with the new sticker mechanic. First, let's look at what's good about this game. Alright, now let's look at the bad. Wait! There's more good than I think most of us remember. I think one of the best parts about this game are the charming and more paper-like environments. And they all look fantastic in 3D. Because, you know, this is a 3DS game about flat objects. Another thing that was very regularly appreciated was the overworld level design with interesting puzzles. But unfortunately, this game was heavily criticized by a lot of people. So let's talk about the bad. As I mentioned earlier, Miyamoto concluded that the story in this game didn't need to be as emphasized as it had been so heavily in the previous entries. And I think that was the first thing that felt off about this game. It starts off at a festival and boom! Bowser explodes and now you have to save everything. Heck! Bowser doesn't even talk. They wasted no time with the story. While there is still some story, there's a lot less than normal. Most of the talking is between you and your new talking crown, which, I mean, I don't love, but whatever. Oh, and there's also lots of toads. I just feel like they probably could have added a little more plot to this one. This game feels incredibly toned down. No interesting side characters, no unique NPCs with silly hats and deep backstories, and very little reason to play for the lore. But by far, the biggest flaw of this game was the main gimmick, stickers. Well, like players asked for, we're back to the traditional turn-based RPG battling system that we're used to from the pre-Wii games. These stickers you collect throughout the stages are battle moves. So if you collect a shoe, you can jump on an enemy. If you get a hammer sticker, you can smash an enemy with a hammer. On paper, this sounds like a good idea, but when you're actually fighting, you tend not to use the more powerful ones because you feel like you have to save the better ones for later just in case. Oh, and if you didn't realize, when you use a sticker, it's gone for good. This wasn't a horrible system, just kind of pointless. What's the point of limiting the powers I have? Randomly collecting stickers in the overworld means that anything could happen. There's no real strategy for collecting these until later in the game when you get a better hang of it. On top of the odd battling, there's no leveling up system. They tried to replace it with different powered stickers, but again, that just made me hoard the good ones until later in the game. It just ended up making me continuously use the cheaper stickers. I felt so paranoid to make sure I didn't waste a powerful sticker on a Goomba. Now, by themselves, the stickers aren't great, but I think they're so much worse in people's eyes because we already had such a great battling battling system in the past with the 1,000-year door. It's all about the 1,000-year door, nothing else. That's all we want, the 1,000-year door, said fans at the time. While looking back on reviews and the reception of this game, everyone compared this to the 1,000-year door, which makes sense to a certain degree, but still, would it have been this bad if the 1,000-year door never existed? Nintendo became their own worst enemy by making a game so good they can't repeat it or go off in their own direction. But to be honest, I don't think they wanted to. At this point, Nintendo was making the Mario & Luigi series the Mario RPG, and they wanted to take the Paper Mario series and turn it into its own quirky thing. But fans didn't want that. And while this turned out to be the lowest rated game on Metacritic this series has seen, this score wasn't too shabby. Sticker Star received generally favorable reviews. With a 75 on Metacritic, the game sold over 400,000 copies in Japan in 2012 and reached almost 2 million units sold worldwide by March 31st, 2013. As mentioned, these stickers garnered mixed reviews. Critics appreciated the strategy involved, but had issues with backtracking and limited puzzle solutions. Combat was praised for its engaging, logic-based battles, though standard encounters were criticized for their lack of difficulty, while boss battles were seen as excessively hard. Graphics and world building were well received, with favorable comparisons to Super Mario 3D Land, and the characters were noted for their charm. Despite some of the criticisms for the visual design's lack of variety and the overuse of toads, the removal of traditional RPG elements like the character progression and proper story disappointed many, and the comedic writing was praised for its humor, which in my opinion feels stale in 2024. But in the next game, fans should have technically got what they wanted, because next we have Mario & Luigi Paper Jam. Before you tell me this isn't technically a Paper Mario game, this is the only game that you play as Paper Mario that doesn't actually have Paper Mario in the title. This is a crossover between that other RPG Nintendo makes and Paper Mario. This is a Paper Mario game, whether you like it or not. So we need to talk about it. The game was developed by Alpha Dream, the team behind the Mario & Luigi series, but the devs from Intelligent Systems were overseeing the project as well. Alpha Dream wanted a way to innovate gameplay with a third playable character. At first, they wanted to use a pre-existing character in the series, such as Bowser, but they already did that. Instead, they chose to have a different Mario, and came up with the idea to have Paper Mario in the game due to the similarities both games had with its RPG and story-driven gameplay elements. They also figured Paper Mario would be able to do things the other brothers couldn't do, like go through thin cracks. The game was announced during an E3 presentation in 2015, and was slated to be released in the spring of 2016. Surprisingly, the game was done ahead of schedule, and released in December in the UK and Japan, and eventually North America in January. That doesn't happen very often. And right off the top, this is the biggest redemption arc, especially when compared to Sticker Star, in my opinion. When the game first released, I never really played it because I wasn't into Mario RPGs as much as I am today, even though I used to play a ton of Bowser's Inside Story and Superstar Saga as a kid. For some reason, this one never stuck out to me. But looking back at it today, this was an amazing idea. Having the Paper Mario and Mario & Luigi series crossover was something I don't think anyone could have expected. It's incredibly rare that Nintendo takes two series and merges them together like this, especially in a similar niche. I forgot how much personality and charm these Mario & Luigi games had. I was actually blown away with how satisfying this game felt. Not to mention the much needed quality of life updates this includes. For example, the help system. Instead of asking the paper crown what to do if you're stuck, like I was a lot of the time because I'm a silly head, this just straight up tells you where you need to go on the map with a big flashing arrow, which is a huge improvement that I didn't even realize I wanted till now. And unlike Super Paper Mario, this game gets right into the action with very little text at the beginning, but the text that there is gets right to the point and is still juicy. But if you thought the cutscenes or dialogue were too long, they added a fast forward button if you wanted to watch the cutscene at double the speed. Not to mention, they added a dash to the characters to get through the game faster. This was from feedback Alpha Dream heard about their previous game, so they made sure to implement as little unnecessary tutorials as possible, which I appreciate, and it's something that Intelligent Systems didn't really do for the Paper Mario series moving forward. These basic quality of life improvements just stand out, especially compared to Sticker Star. The graphics and environments are fantastic for a 3DS game, and are absolutely complemented with the 3D gimmick, which I love, don't fight me. And all that is perfectly orchestrated with the fantastic soundtrack that makes me want to get up and do a dance. But let's look at the battling system, as that's what a lot of the community hated about Sticker Star. Obviously, this game is a little different because it's not technically a Paper Mario game. This is in the Mario & Luigi series, which is pretty similar when it comes down to the writing and basic RPG mechanics, but at this point has become its own thing, which is funny because the Mario & Luigi series now takes more from the original Paper Mario games than Paper Mario does. The Mario & Luigi series has always had a more in-depth battle system, which has you controlling the Mario Bros while you dodge, jump, use a hammer, and random items. It's very similar with the jumping on enemies, the hammer, and basic map puzzles. As I say this out loud, the Mario & Luigi series and the Paper Mario series is very similar, at least the classic Paper Mario. And I think this is why this worked so well. We're bringing Paper Mario back to his roots with this action-filled RPG. This feels like a more fleshed out turn-based battle system fans wanted for this character, character. Being able to dodge enemies and use unique paper-based moves are so amazing. And doing all of this in a paper-solving 3D map is great to have back in a classic Mario RPG way. There's also these cool big cardboard machine sections where the Mario Bros are riding this massive machine, and there are different machines to ride too, so it doesn't feel super repetitive over time. Also, something cool to note is the fact that they added a white outline to differentiate Paper Mario's design, and they kept this up until the remake of the Thousand Year Door. Clearly Alpha Dream kinda knew what they were doing with Paper Mario, debatably a little bit more than Intelligent Systems did. This game is fantastic and is exactly what I was hoping for, though not everyone agrees with me on this. This game scored 76 on Metacritic, just 1 point above Sticker Star, with it selling just shy of 50,000 sales in Japan in the first week, which is roughly half the sales from the previous Mario & Luigi entry, Dream Team. Critics praised the combat, particularly the incorporation of Paper Mario elements, which refreshed the experience for series veterans. While the inclusion of a third character was sometimes seen as cumbersome, battles remained manageable and engaging. Opinions on the writing and humor were mixed. Some critics felt like the game did not fully utilize the potential of merging the Paper Mario and Mario & Luigi universes, though the interactions between the characters from both worlds was enjoyed. The storyline was seen as lengthy and slow-paced, but was effectively broken up with minigames. Toad Hunts received mixed reactions, with some finding them fun and others feeling they disrupted the story's pacing. World building was also noted as unique, encouraging exploration, but some found the environments too similar to other Mario games. It is a Mario game. The papercraft battles were also considered a weaker element, sometimes dragging on and becoming tedious. Overall, Paper Jam was seen as a good entry point for newcomers, offering a blend of familiar and fresh elements, though it fell short of fully capitalizing on its crossover potential, which I get to a certain degree, but this is what Paper Mario fans wanted: a standard RPG leveling up system with complex battle mechanics. I don't know, I loved it though. Less than a year after Paper Jam, we got our first HD Paper Mario game, Paper Mario Color Splash. This one is an interesting one. Unfortunately, fans still had "this isn't the Thousand Year Door" syndrome. Color Splash was announced in a Nintendo Direct in March 2016 and released worldwide in October 2016. The paint theme was conceived by Atsushi Isano, director of Intelligent Systems, and developed to take full advantage of the Wii U gamepad. Yay! We love the Wii U gamepad, right? The funny thing is, this game was kind of dead on arrival, as Nintendo fans not only knew about the Nintendo Switch already, but they had already officially announced it this very month. Nintendo had pretty much accepted its failure and did what they needed to do. They knew it wasn't a system seller, and we can see that. The Paper Mario series pivoted towards action-adventure with newer Paper Mario games, and Nintendo decided that the Mario & Luigi series would take over as the Mario RPG genre. This was confirmed by co-producer Riza Tabata at E3 2016 in an interview with Kotaku, where she mentioned that the Paper Mario series would now focus more on puzzle solving and humor. To address the gripes from previous games, some gameplay elements got a makeover. The storyline was beefed up, adding more layers to highlight Mario's relationship with his allies. When I first played the game, this looked absolutely amazing, with fantastic resolution, and physics are improved. Like in this game, when Mario jumps, it feels just like paper and it's really polished. The premise is Bowser and his minions are taking the color away from the world, so it's Mario's job to paint back objects, toads, and other things, but you only have a certain amount of paint to do so. You also collect paint by simply whacking things. I don't want to be too harsh on this game. In fact, I really wanted to enjoy it. While the overworld gameplay is pretty fun with the puzzle solving aspect of the game, it is once again bogged down with the overbearing writing and the battle system. In my opinion, this seems to be a hot take of mine, but I don't really find the writing that great. The storyline itself is good, but the dialogue is really long, like non-stop boomer memes, and the characters would just do things with no motivation. It does the thing where, oh, I guess I owe you a favor because you saved my life, but like, why is that your incentive? Also, the paint bucket keeps asking me to ask him for help. All right, let's get into the battling system. This is extremely similar to Sticker Star, but instead of these stickers, we have cards. This is just what we needed. Except here, there are a few more steps. The way you battle in Color Splash is you have to collect the cards throughout the levels. When you enter a battle, you can choose between each of your cards, just like in Sticker Star, and then you use one of the cards. After you use it, it's gone. After selecting your card, you then have to paint the card by holding the touchscreen. After it is painted, you select the Done Painting button. Then you use the painted card you have to flick the card towards the TV. After you use the card, you go into the traditional jumping on enemies. Did you hear how much tapping I needed to do? The gamepad is probably the worst part. Not only do you have to use a touchscreen, but everything you're doing just seems like pointless busy work. First, picking the card. Something I don't like about this is the fact you can't use your analog stick for some reason. You must go through your cards with your finger or a stylus, which sucks because it forces me to move my hand from the controller to use the touchscreen. It was a similar issue I had with the orientation of the Wii Remote in Super Paper Mario. It's just kind of annoying to have to move my hand placement, especially when I feel like there would be such an easy workaround for this. Using an analog stick would have been fine. And unlike how we see these stickers on the graph in Sticker Star, these cards are all stacked on top of each other and sort in a very weird way, which forces me to flip around all of them just to find the right one. My other gripe is with painting the cards. The reason you want to paint the cards is to make them stronger. But again, this just feels like a complete time waster. I have to hold the stylus on the screen for an extra 3 seconds for the paint to fill up. And after it's done being painted, you have to click the done button. Like, I can't paint anymore, why are you asking me if I'm done painting? It's just another button to click. And then you have to flick it. It's another pointless action. Why does the card just not get sent out when I say I'm done painting? It would at least have a purpose in that case. And then when I send the card out, you have to quickly move your hand back to the A button to complete your action sequence. Can tap the screen, but I find that the button is less prone to miss inputs. And just like in Sticker Star, because the cards have a one-time use, there's a mentality of using all the weak ones first to save the strong ones for later. Oh, and there's no leveling up system either. They literally learned nothing from Sticker Star. Aside from better graphics and music, everything is slower and this whole battling system is just stupidly sluggish for no reason. There was so much potential here. If they take away the battling silliness, then this would actually be a fine Paper Mario game. And they could have easily brought this over to the Switch, but I think Nintendo sees this as a game beyond repair. And again, this game got a ton of hate for the battling system. Not only was there a lot of genuine issues with it, it still wasn't the 1,000-year door. Nowhere near as charming, no side characters, and of course, no reason to grind because you're not leveling up. Fans immediately hated it, slamming the game for being too much like Sticker Star and sticking to the same action-adventure formula. The backlash was so intense that a Change.org petition popped up, demanding the cancellation of both Color Splash and the 3DS game Metroid Prime Federation Force. Tech Radar called the petition a frightening example of how quickly and harshly we judge games we know next to nothing about, while Kotaku claimed that the Paper Mario series was in the midst of an identity crisis, overshadowed by the Mario & Luigi RPG series. Oh, and also Nintendo made a little bit of an oopsies when they released this game. They accidentally released the full game 2 weeks early. Though they quickly pulled the preload option, some lucky gamers who had already downloaded it got to keep their early copies. Color Splash sold roughly 20,000 copies in Japan during its first week, and reached a total of 186,000 copies by the end of 2017. Which is really bad. Paper Mario Color Splash got generally favorable reviews on Metacritic, scoring 76, the same as Paper Jam. Gosh. It even snagged a nomination for favorite video game at the 2017 Kids' Choice Awards, but lost to Just Dance 2017. So is that really even an accomplishment? Comment if it is an accomplishment. Also subscribe. Critics loved the game's witty dialogue and comedic moments. Game Informer raved about its belly laugh moments and unforgettable plot points. Nintendo Life highlighted the humor and charm as well, making every new interaction a joy. Games Radar Plus called the writing a major redeeming quality. Clearly some people liked the writing more than I did. The characters' design, especially the Toads, received mixed reviews. Some enjoyed the Toads' varied personalities and comedic lines. There were a few less impressed critics, finding the endless parade of Toads unoriginal and monotonous. The game's graphics were widely praised. Some critics noted that HD graphics made the paper visuals pop, with clever uses of paper like toilet paper and wrapping paper adding to the charm. Combat, on the other hand, was heavily criticized. VentureBeat deemed the battles were too easy and tedious, while Polygon saw little reason to continue fighting after the first few hours. Some didn't really understand the battle system and questioned why anyone would even bother with enemy encounters. Color Splash was often unfavorable compared to the earlier entries like Paper Mario 64 and the 1,000-Year Door. Who could have seen that coming? But this is mainly due to its lack of RPG elements. This game is almost unrecognizable as an RPG, but still entertaining. No doubt this is an improvement over Sticker Star, but still too gimmicky compared to the original RPG style. US gamers summed it up by attributing the genre shift to Nintendo's love for surprising its audience, even if it meant making the combat feel more like a chore than a joy. But let's hope the new Switch release improves on its last entries. The development at Intelligent Systems decided to crank up the innovation for the next one, Paper Mario Origami King, ditching the safe route and diving headfirst into the overly papery territory. Knowing they couldn't please every picky fan out there, Intelligent Systems said, let's get folding. And they introduced origami and confetti as fresh paper-themed concepts. They also ditched the traditional linear gameplay from Sticker Star and Color Splash for an open-world format, which works a lot better and is more traditional, but still not the 1,000-Year Door. Nintendo had plans to unveil the game at E3 2020, tying it to the 35th anniversary of Super Mario Bros. But thanks to the Expo's cancellation, they had to scrap those plans and reveal the game separately. So they did what every sane person would do at the time and just posted it on Twitter. I remember seeing this one day and being absolutely shocked that they announced an entire Mario game on Twitter. I remember it made me feel very uncertain about the future of Nintendo Directs. But to be fair, this was when the world was in lockdown and no one knew what was going on. Jumping into Origami King. Just like the last title, the graphics are phenomenal, with literally everything being made out of art and craft supplies. It's just so creative and blends so well with everything. This has to be one of the best art directions I've seen in a game. I thought a similar thing with Color Splash, but this one feels even more papery. Maybe it's because of the origami and paper mache elements? After Mario and Luigi drive to Peach's castle in Luigi's paper cart, they go into the castle to discover Peach has been transformed into origami from the evil Origami King. Paper Mario then gets trapped and meets up with our new sidekick, Olivia. What's better than one sidekick? Two, as we get to play with folded Bowser as well. hell? Let's go! I love it when Bowser's folded. When the castle is eventually getting lifted off the ground with streamers because of the Origami King, a Shy Guy flies to the rescue in Bowser's clown car. Now, I'm getting a little more into the story with this one because it's actually really good. The story is probably the best out of all the Paper Mario games after Thousand Year Door, and maybe even better, in my opinion. It has surprisingly great undertones and suspense and makes me want to continue playing. The rating isn't overbearing, and the tutorials don't feel like they've overstayed their welcome as much as Color Splash. Unlike the past Paper Mario games, it doesn't feel forced for these characters to be saving the castle. There's also not a constant interruption of Toads talking to you either, and the enemies get right into action instead of all of the dumb text. Anyways, good story, I really like it. But now let's touch on the game's gimmicks. First, the confetti, which is pretty similar to the paint mechanic in Color Splash, except here, it's just better. And I don't even know why. I think it's mainly because the confetti doesn't feel overused. The paint, you collect it by hitting stuff in the overworld and apply it to certain objects in the game. In this game, you generally fill gaps with confetti to get coins, just like painting in Color Splash. Thankfully, the confetti mechanic isn't such a big deal and doesn't hinder the battling system. It's also really satisfying to collect and shoot. Look at this! Speaking of which, let's dive into the battling system. Personally, I think this gets a lot more hate than what it deserves. Pretty much the way this works is you're on a circle-looking grid, kind of like a dartboard. On the circle, you have to line up the enemies in a certain way based on the weapon you're using to hit them. For example, when you're using your boots, you want to line them all up in a straight line and boom, you can hit them all. I genuinely don't mind this. In fact, I like the fresh take. It wasn't nearly as bad as it was made out to be back when the game first released. And I think a lot of fans were just caught up in the fact that, once again, this wasn't the Thousand Year Door, which is silly. At this point, the Paper Mario franchise had moved on from that, and the RPG style games were just more taken over by the Mario & Luigi franchise, which I guess is now dead, but it could be coming back. We don't know yet. But that being said, this does still have unique RPG elements. I think it's cool how you have to quickly line up enemies in a certain time limit. It adds a fun suspense, and when you land a perfect combo, it's satisfying, especially with that time limit. It's not the most fun the series has had, but it's really not that bad. I think the biggest issue that even I see is the lack of the leveling up system. Again, for the third time in a row in a mainline series. And this goes back into the argument of even doing these battles in the first place. It seems like the only reason anyone would even do this is because of the coins, but coins can be found on the map everywhere, so that's not too much of a concern for me. You could argue the coins are helpful in battles because you can pay for the Toads to help, and if you wanted to, pay for more time to solve a battle puzzle, but that's just a small portion of what they do. And when you battle, there's absolutely no shortage of coins. There's a small leveling up system with these heart crystals you can find while progressing through the game and searching in the map if you really want to get picky. This game is not bad, but gets so much hate. Again, this isn't what fans wanted out of a Paper Mario RPG. Even though the writing is great, there are brief side characters, there are amazing overworld mechanics, the graphics are phenomenal, and the music is fantastic. But it doesn't matter because it's not the Thousand Year Door, so it's bad. And the turn-based battling system is bad because it's unique. That's stupid. Heck, I've seen stupid comments about the game being too papery. There's too much paper? Really? In Paper Mario? Are you kidding? That's ridiculous. This is one of the most creative games I've ever seen. Haters are just looking for any way to hate on this game, but again, it's not the Thousand Year Door, so it sucks. Origami King scored a solid 80 out of 100 on Metacritic. Critics praised the game's innovative world design and mechanics, saying that they're a perfect fit for the storyline. The paper-style world building was a hit. Some said exploring every corner of the world was a blast, and the soundtrack was catchy and changed with every world. But not everything was perfect. Some critics felt let down by the lack of RPG elements from previous Paper Mario titles, missing the heights of the classic Paper Mario, and who would have seen this coming, the Thousand Year Door. Others missed the satisfying progression of XP, torn on whether it really mattered in the end. The combat mechanics divided opinions. Some reviewers loved the innovative twist, especially in boss battles, while others found it lacking in rewards and challenge. The new combat system was praised for turning a weakness into a strength, but some felt it was more of an inconvenience than a challenge, while others wished for a bit more excitement. Sales-wise, the Origami King was number 2 in UK and sold over 109,000 copies in its first week in Japan. It even set a launch month sales record for the series in the US, becoming one of the best-selling games on the Switch. So despite its few creases, it looks like the Origami King did pretty well on its own, not directly compared to the Thousand Year Door. Heck, I played Origami King before the Thousand Year Door, and there were certain things I missed about it. Like, I felt like the Thousand Year Door remake was a lot less papery and more cardboardy. Animations were just a little stiffer in the Thousand Year Door than Origami King, but that's the biggest thing I felt. And again, I think the biggest issue here wasn't the game itself, as I really enjoyed my time with it. It was more the fact that it was so different from the game we had 20 years ago, Thousand Year Door. When you constantly draw comparisons to a game in the series that is now a completely different genre, yeah, your opinion might change. But I think if you put aside the fact you wanted this to be the next Thousand Year Door, then it's a pretty darn good game. Not perfect, but absolutely better than what people are giving it credit for. But of course, as we know, Nintendo finally listened to fans that wouldn't take anything else. And here we have Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door remake for the Nintendo Switch. As for the remake, remake, there isn't too much to be said aside from the fact everything was made new from the ground up. It looks phenomenal on Switch. The game was first announced on December 14th, 2023 via a trailer during a Nintendo Direct presentation. Once again, Nintendo and Intelligent Systems would be cranking this one out. The game would be coming out in 2024, almost 20 years after the original game released, and that's really all we knew about it. The development of this remake was really quiet with little news on it up until release. This was my first exposure to the Thousand Year Door. After playing the original Paper Mario 64, I could see how they improved upon the game itself, but we already talked about that earlier. Personality, the battling system, and the story are all amazing in this title and hold up still to this day in the remake. The graphics got a complete overhaul, the lighting is amazing, the resolution is crisp, the character models are more vibrant. This is truly the game fans raved about, and I'm on board. It really makes me wonder why Nintendo decided to go off the rails in this series so many times in the first place. But finally, Nintendo said shut up and gave us exactly what we asked for. And yeah, I think it's amazing that Nintendo is packaging these older games for a newer audience and seeing if they can still hold up to today's standards. They did it with Super Mario RPG and now this game. The remake was extremely faithful to the original. Even the voice acting is reused, but other elements are completely redone. The music having a total overhaul for the better, with a ton of quality life improvements like avoiding the backtracking issues the original had. The game had so much hype, pre-orders were almost constantly sold out on Amazon leading up to release, but there were some issues like the 30 frames per second cap. This was a huge point of contention among fans, but mainly because the GameCube ran at 60 frames per second, so this one aspect feels like a bit of a downgrade. You could say it fell flat. But at the end of the day, this is an RPG, and it really doesn't matter. And the reception of the remake was also praised by critics and fans alike, giving the game all new visuals, new music, and some nifty quality of life improvements. Needless to say, fans loved this game. They perfected the previous Paper Mario formula. So we're finally seeing the resurgence of the Paper Mario series. Do you think that the Paper Mario series even fell off? All we can hope for is that Nintendo continues to listen to fans like they finally did with the Thousand Year Door, and remake it again in 10 years, because that's what fans are probably going to want. But maybe we can see it innovate from here. If you want to see the rise and unfortunate fall of the Pokemon series on Nintendo Switch, click this. Please consider liking and subscribing. I hope to see you in the next one. See you later.